So by popular demand, I've been asked to talk about some of my favorite funny moments from history. So the first thing is how Plato got his name. And when I say Plato, I really do mean like the ancient philosopher from Greece. You may have seen this trending on TikTok. A few different historians on TikTok I've seen have talked about this. But I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about it myself. Now, if you know much about Plato, you know that he was a student of Socrates and the teacher of Aristotle. However, Plato probably wasn't his real name. His real name, as far as we can tell, was Aristocles, or Aristocles. I don't speak Greek, one of those two. Now, Plato itself is just an Anglicization of a Greek word. What that means is we've taken this Greek word and we've changed it over time as it's been used in the English language. The original word that he was called is Platon. Now, Platon just means broad. So there's a lot of records that show that he earned this nickname because he was so broad. Now, before I get into the reasons about why he probably did earn this nickname, I really briefly just wanted to mention that there are a couple other possible reasons. One of which is that he just had a broad range of knowledge, and that is what allowed him to earn the nickname Broad. Some sources even say that it was because he thought he had a broad forehead, and so he named himself Broad. But ultimately, what the vast majority of sources say is that he was a professional wrestler, and his wrestling coach gave him this nickname because he was so jacked. Now, wrestling was pretty common back then. Socrates wrestled, Aristotle wrestled. It wasn't uncommon. And when we say professional wrestler, we don't necessarily mean like WWE or whatever. You know, it could have been a number of things. But one thing that is in agreement is that he was jacked. The guy was buff. So the second thing I wanted to talk about today was the best last words ever. It comes from a guy named Saint Lawrence. He's a Catholic saint, and this goes back to the early days of Christianity. Today, Christianity accounts for 1/3 of the world's population as far as religious people go. If you live on the earth, there's a 1 in 3 chance you are a Christian. Back in the 3rd century, Christianity was actually illegal, and you could be persecuted or killed at various points in time because you were a Christian. There were several different periods where they would just let you practice underground, and then there were several periods where you were persecuted, you were killed, they came for the Christians. Now, during one of those movements, several deacons of Pope Sixtus II were persecuted and killed, including the Pope himself. Now, when all of that happened, St. Lawrence was the last one alive, which made him the top church authority at the time. When the Pope died, the prefect of Rome demanded that the church turn over all of their riches, all of their valuables, and everything. And Lawrence, knowing that this would happen, decided to give it away to all these poor people, all these widows, and everything, which is pretty smart when you think about it. Can you imagine how it would look if the government comes to these widows and says, you're gonna have to give us all this money. I know you're poor, I know you're destitute, but you got that from the church, which means you're gonna have to give that to us. There would be a freaking uprising. So the prefect shows up and Lawrence is like, oh, you wanted all my stuff? Oh no, I just gave it away. And then when the prefect continued to demand that he give it to him, Lawrence brought up all of the people he gave the money to and said, these are the riches. These are the people you would be taking this from. You sure you really want to do that? So the prefect got so mad that he ordered St. Lawrence would be burned alive. Now, when you think about burning alive in the Middle Ages, you're probably going to think of being burned at the stake, right? You're tied to this big wooden pole, fires are lit beneath you, and you just burn alive. Not this time. The prefect of Rome ordered that a griddle be prepared. I guess griddle's not the right word. Gridiron is the word that is being used in sources, but you get the point. Think of like a human-sized barbecue. That's what we're talking about here. Bars of metal laid over really hot coals and fire for him to be burned alive. So after suffering on the grill for who knows how long, Lawrence is able to muster the strength to look at his executioners, smile, and laughingly say, turn me over, I'm done on this side. The best part, though, is they actually did flip him over. What a boss, though, right? Okay, third story I want to talk about today is the Fourth Crusade's failure. The Fourth Crusade was just like a chef's kiss of mediocrity. So the Third Crusade, which was led by Richard the Lionheart, didn't really end the way that the church had hoped it would. They didn't lose completely. I mean, they did. They failed. They didn't take the Holy Land, but they were able to create a treaty that would allow more Europeans to visit the Holy Land a bit easier. So it was like a success, but everyone knew it was mostly a failure. Well, new pope comes in, and that failure isn't enough for Innocent III, so he commissions a new crusade. Unlike the previous crusades, which were mostly led by some charismatic political leader, like Richard the Lionheart, the Fourth Crusade didn't really have that. There was no famous king, there was no famous military commander who was leading the Fourth Crusade. Now what this means is the church had to recruit for the crusade pretty much all on its own. The king can conscript people, the king can say, I'm going to bring all of these troops with me. But a few years earlier, they had already lost a lot of people, and so very few kings would have been willing to do that, to hop on board. And so the church finds itself now having to recruit all of the people themselves. Now, they also don't think that they can muster together all of the supplies and the time necessary to walk all the way to the Holy Land. So they decide on the next best thing. They commission some ships to be built for them in Venice. The plan is some of them who feel like walking all the way to the Holy Land will do so. Some will sail from their own port if they want to, but the bulk of all these troops are going to meet together in Venice, and they're going to sail from the Mediterranean over to Jerusalem, Acre, those kind of places. Now, when they get to Venice, they realized a few things. First, they had anticipated having about 33,500 men, but only 12,000 showed up. Second, they had commissioned enough ships to be built for 33,500 men, so 50 war galleys, 450 transport ships, the works. What that meant was they didn't have the necessary money to pay the Venetians for their work. They had agreed on a price of 85,000 silver marks, but the Crusaders had like 35,000. They were able to muster up another 14,000 when they realized that they needed to do something more. So they come to the Venetians with 49,000 silver marks. The original agreed upon price was 85,000. Now the Venetians, who pretty much halted their entire economy to build this vast amount of ships in such a short amount of time, needed that money. If they didn't have that money, their economy was essentially going to collapse. So instead they gave the Crusaders a choice. You can either pay us the money, or you can go invade Dalmatia. Dalmatia, which is now the Croatian area, had just decided to leave their agreement with Venice as far as trading goes. And so by forcing the Dalmatians back into that trade agreement, they would increase the Venetians' economy and sort of pay for the ships in another way. So they send a letter to the Pope saying, hey, we're going to go do this thing for the Venetians, just so you're aware. The Pope writes a letter back saying, no, those guys are other Christians. You should not be attacking other Christians. And if you do so, I will excommunicate all of you. The Pope gets another letter back that says, too late, we already did it. So the Pope excommunicates them all, but tells the Crusaders if they fulfill their crusading duty that they originally agreed upon and invade the homeland, they will be brought back in and their excommunication will be revoked. So they decide to do that. But then they keep walking and they keep walking and they just get tired. They just get frustrated and they get tired. And they're like, hey, there's Constantinople. What if we just sacked Constantinople instead? And then they did. They took all of the stuff from it, they turned it into a Christian city. Well, Christian meaning Roman Catholic. It was only a temporary measure. The Eastern Orthodox Church ended up controlling them again anyway, but you get the point. After the successful sacking of Constantinople, most of them decide to go back. A few select soldiers decide, no, we're going to push all the way to Jerusalem. Considering they only set out with about 14,000 men, 14,000? Considering they had only set out with about 12,000 men, and most of them are returning home, you can imagine how that small forces crusade went. Not very well. The bulk of the people get back home, they look at the Pope, and the Pope just kind of is like, not what I hoped for, but I'll take it. Restores their standing in the church. They all just kind of go home having said they crusaded, but like mostly having not. For the fourth story, I want to talk about what is possibly my favorite story on this list, which is the story of Frederick the Great and how the potato became popular in what is now Central Europe, Germany, Prussia, that kind of thing. One of the nicknames for Frederick the Great, even lasting to this day, is Der Kartoffelkönig, which is the Potato King. So when he was king of Prussia, there was a food shortage going on. And this new food source starts coming in from the New World. It's called the potato. It's nutrient dense, it's calorie dense, it's easy to grow. And so he figures, hey, let's just plant this everywhere. We'll have food for everyone. It'll be cheap, it'll be accessible, and people can not starve anymore. So he tried tons of different ways of trying to get people to grow potatoes in their gardens. The only problem was people didn't like them. They thought they were bland, they thought they didn't taste that great, and they thought they were weird looking, which I know. Where we are today, Shocker. So he tries tons of different ways of incentivizing people to buy, grow, and eat potatoes, and none of them work. Finally, he comes up with this brilliant idea: rebranding. Gets all of his royalty friends and all of his rich friends to plant potatoes in their gardens and actually bans them from the general public. Then he sets up guards around the potato fields so that people can't get in. Now, humans typically want things they can't have, and so all of a sudden, the demand for potatoes rises. The next thing that Frederick the Great does is he tells the guards to be really bad guards and just pretend that they don't see people sneaking in and stealing the potatoes. So all of a sudden, you have these regular city folk, town folk, stealing these potatoes, thinking they got away with it because they snuck past the guards, and all of a sudden, potatoes are popping up in everybody's garden, everywhere, and it's now, to this day, a food staple of many European countries. Basically, he tricked his people into stealing potatoes. Now, this last story I wanted to put last just because it's controversial. We don't know if it actually happened or not. Some sources say yes, some sources don't exist. So, we don't really know. But basically is that Liechtenstein went to war and then came back with an extra person. So in 1866, the Austro-Prussian War is going on. Liechtenstein, who is mostly a neutral power, just decides to guard this mountain pass in case something goes wrong. So they send this small force of 80 men up to this mountain pass, and nothing happens. But 81 come back. They didn't send extra reinforcement, they didn't send supplies out, and the guy just stayed. We don't know what happened. What I like to think is that some guy just saw them, snuck into their forces, and assimilated in, and either everyone didn't notice or was just cool with it. But what most likely happened is they made a friend. Can you imagine? You go out to war, you make a friend instead of see battle, and then you come back. Now, once again, the story is debated because there's a lot of sources that don't exist, that should exist, that would prove this correct. Some sources that do prove it correct are questionable. Some sources straight up say it never happened. Sometimes they say that it happened in World War I. Some sources say that it happened in the Austro-Prussian War. So did it really happen? Who knows? But it's awesome. If you want to see more of these kind of videos, just let me know in the comments. If you liked the video, please subscribe, and I'll see you later.